The first thing they teach you in botany is that some roots run so deep they can crack concrete. My son, Martin, was about to learn that lesson the hard way. He just didn't know the concrete was his own future and the roots were the ones he just murdered. He saw me as a relic, a man tending a patch of sentimental weeds. He was about to discover that sentiment, when properly cultivated, has a value far beyond his comprehension, and a price he could never afford to pay. The taxi pulled away from the curb, leaving me in the familiar silence of my own driveway. A week with my sister Helen had been a welcome respite, but home was here. Home was this house, this garden, this lingering scent of soil and rose that clung to everything. I paid the driver, my old joints protesting as I retrieved my suitcase. The front lawn was immaculate, a sterile green carpet. Martin had always insisted on that, hiring a service to keep it unnaturally perfect. I preferred the beautiful chaos of the backyard. I walked around the side of the house, anticipating the burst of color and fragrance that always greeted me. Rose's garden was a living tapestry, a testament to her 30 years of passion. Each petal, each thorn, was a memory. But today, there was no perfume on the breeze. Instead, a harsh chemical smell assaulted my senses. The smell of curing concrete. My steps faltered. My heart began a slow, heavy drumbeat against my ribs. Something was terribly wrong. I rounded the final corner, and my world simply stopped. Where a symphony of crimson, pink, and apricot had once stood, there was only gray. A vast, brutal slab of it stretched from the back door to the old oak tree, perfectly level, clinically clean. It was patio, a monstrous, soulless patio. In the center of this concrete wasteland sat a brand-new, ridiculously expensive-looking outdoor furniture set, still bearing its showroom tags. My legs felt weak. The irreplaceable cultivars, the decades of Rose's work, her life's joy. It was all gone, buried under a tombstone of convenience. The back door slid open, and my son, Martin, emerged, a triumphant smile on his face. He was holding a glass of some expensive-looking liquor. Behind him was his wife, Eleanor, her expression a mixture of smug satisfaction and impatience. She was already mentally decorating the space, I can tell. They looked like conquering heroes who had finally vanquished a long-standing enemy. And in a way, I suppose they had. They had finally defeated my wife's memory, or so they believed. They saw a victory. I saw a declaration of war. Surprise! Dad, he boomed, spreading his arms wide, as if presenting a masterpiece. What do you think? A massive upgrade, right? Eleanor and I decided you needed a more practical space. Think of the entertaining we can do. No more fussing with those messy old bushes. I stared at him, at the smooth, unlined face that I no longer recognized. The words came out of his mouth, but they made no sense. It was like listening to a language from a distant, unfeeling star. Practical. Upgrade. Messy bushes. Eleanor glided forward, her heels clicking ominously on the new concrete. Charles, it adds tremendous value to the property. Any realtor will tell you a functional outdoor living space is a key selling point. We had a top crew come in while you were gone. Did it all in a few days, quick and painless. She patted my arm, a gesture devoid of any warmth. Her eyes scanned the gray expanse, not my face. She was already calculating commissions, planning the sale, spending the inheritance she believed was already hers. My mind reeled. The Isabel's blush, a rose had named for her own mother, the Golden Jubilee, which had won the National Horticultural Prize a decade ago, and her special project, the one she kept in a small sheltered patch by the stone wall, the one she called her Midnight. All of it, gone, reduced to mulch and buried under their ambition. I felt a surge of white-hot rage, so powerful it threatened to consume me. My hands clenched into fists at my sides, my knuckles white. They were still talking, their voices a meaningless drone. They expected a fight. They wanted one. An outburst from a sentimental old man, a tantrum they could dismiss as grief or senility. It would be proof for them, justification for the next step of their plan. The one where they would gently explain that I was no longer capable of managing my own affairs. They were waiting for me to give them the ammunition they needed. And in that moment of pure fury, a sliver of ice-cold clarity pierced through. I unclenched my fists. I let the breath I was holding escape in a slow, silent stream. The rage did not vanish. It simply cooled, hardening from a raging fire into a solid core of purpose. I looked at my son, at his expectant face, and I smiled. He was a thin, brittle thing, a mask of civility that did not reach my eyes. "I see," I said, my voice unnervingly calm. "You've been busy. It's quite a change." The smile confused them. This was not the reaction they had prepared for. Eleanor's perfectly sculpted eyebrows drew together in a faint line of pomade. "Well, yes, we thought it would be a wonderful surprise." I nodded slowly, my gaze sweeping over the sterile gray slab once more, committing every detail of their desecration to memory. "A surprise," I repeated softly. "You are certainly right about that. I think I need to go inside and rest." The trip was tiring. Without another word, I turned and walked back into the house, leaving them standing there, in the middle of their expensive, worthless triumphs. The silence of the house was a comfort. I walked past the living room they had redecorated in shades of beige and gray, past the photos of their lavish vacations. I went straight to Rose's study, the one room they never touched because it had no resale value. It was dusty and filled with her books, her notes, her scent. I sank into her old leather chair, the one worn smooth by years of her sitting and dreaming. Here, the grief I had held at bay finally washed over me. Not for the flowers, but for what their destruction represented. It was a complete and utter erasure of her. They had not just paved a garden, they had tried to bury a life. My Rose was not a memory to them, she was an obstacle. Her legacy was an untidy plot of land that stood in the way of their inheritance. They saw the world only in terms of transactions of profit and loss. They could not see the love, the dedication, the science that had bloomed in that soil. And that was their fatal mistake, a mistake I was going to make them pay for. One calculated step at a time. The tears dried, replaced by a cold, methodical resolve. Anger was a wild fire, destructive and pointless. What I needed was a gardener's approach, patience, a deep understanding of the environment, knowing exactly when to plant a seed and when to pull a weed. My revenge would not be a screaming match. It would be a careful cultivation of their own greed, nurtured until it flowered into their spectacular public ruin. Rose would not have wanted rage. She would have wanted justice, elegant and precise, and I would deliver it. My eyes fell upon the rows of journals on her shelves, decades of meticulous records. Rose was a scientist as much as she was an artist. Every cross-pollination, every success, every failure was documented in her looping, elegant script. She had often joked that her journals were the most valuable thing she owned, not for their sentiment, but for the information locked within them. I had always smiled, thinking she was being modest. Now I understood. She had been telling me the literal truth. I pulled down the last 5 years of her work, the ones bound in dark green leather. I knew what I was looking for. Her final project. The one she spoke of only in hushed, excited tones. The one that had consumed her for the better part of a decade. Her quest for the impossible, the holy grail of rosarians, a genetically stable true blue rose. Not lavender, not purple, but a deep, velvety blue, the color of the sky at twilight. She had called it her midnight blue. My fingers, stained with the memory of good earth, trembled slightly as I opened the final journal. The pages were filled with complex diagrams of gene splicing, notes on pigment expression, and countless failed attempts. Then, about 6 months before she passed, the tone of the entries changed. A breakthrough, a stable mutation, the delicate process of cultivating the first few specimens. She had done it. My brilliant Rose had actually done it. She had created something the world of botany had only ever dreamed of. And the only living examples of that multi-million-dollar breakthrough had been in the small, sheltered patch by the old stone wall. The very patch now buried under several tons of quick-setting concrete. Martin and Eleanor, in their haste to install their soulless patio, had not just destroyed a garden. They had bulldozed a fortune they never knew existed. The plan began to form in my mind, not as a vague notion, but as a series of clear sequential steps. The first was to find an ally. Tucked into the back of the journal was a business card, slightly faded but still crisp. Dr. Eris Thorne, director of the National Botanical Garden. Rose had spoken of him with immense respect. He was one of the few people she felt was a true peer, someone who understood the science behind the beauty. She had planned to contact him once her Midnight Blue was ready for its official debut. She never got the chance, but I could. I would finish what she started, though not in the way she had ever intended. I picked up the old rotary phone on her desk, the weight of it familiar in my hand. I dialed the number, my heart steady. I was not a grieving widower making a sentimental call. I was an executor preparing to unveil a masterpiece. When a polite secretary answered, I used the tone of quiet authority I hadn't employed in years. Please tell Dr. Thorne that Charles Hale is calling on behalf of the late Rose Hale. It concerns her private research. I believe he will want to take this call. There was a brief pause, a muffled conversation, and then a new voice came on the line, deep, cultured, and cautious. This is Eris Thorne. To whom am I speaking? I introduced myself. The moment I said Rose Hale's name, the professional frost in his voice melted. Good heavens, he exclaimed. Rose Hale's husband? I'm so very sorry for your loss. Your wife was a genius, a true visionary. We in the community have mourned her passing deeply. Her work was legendary. It was the opening I needed. Dr. Thorne, I said, keeping my voice even. I am calling because I have her final research journals. They detail a project she completed shortly before her death, a project I believe the entire botanical world has been waiting for. I paused, letting the silence stretch. It's about a genetically stable blue rose. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. It was the sound of a man who had just been told that the lost ark had been found in a suburban backyard. When he finally spoke, his voice was a choked whisper. Are you certain? A stable cyanic pigment? It's not possible. Everyone has tried. It's a genetic impossibility. My wife, doctor, did not believe in impossibilities, I replied. She believed in science and patience. I have her notes. I have her diagrams. And until 3 days ago, I had the only living specimens. His sharp intake of breath was audible. What happened 3 days ago, Mr. Hale? I told him everything. About my son, my daughter-in-law, and the patio. Meanwhile, the enemy was advancing. A few days after my call with Thorne, Martin and Eleanor came over again. This time, they brought reinforcements, a sleek, smiling man in an expensive suit who they introduced as their estate lawyer, Mr. Davies. They sat me down in my own living room, their expressions a performance of deep concern. Dad, we're worried about you, Martin began. This big house, all the memories, it's too much for you to handle alone. Eleanor chimed in, her voice dripping with false sympathy. We found a wonderful assisted living community for you, she said, sliding a glossy brochure across the coffee table. It has a pool and social activities. You'd be so much more comfortable there. Mr. Davies then cleared his throat, taking center stage. Charles, he said, using my first name with an unearned familiarity. Martin and Eleanor are just trying to do what's best. We've drawn up some paperwork for a power of attorney. It would just allow them to manage your affairs, sell the house, and ensure you're settled comfortably. They were trying to have me declared incompetent. The patio wasn't just about property value. It was step one. They thought my quiet acceptance was a sign of senility, a low broken spirit. They were moving in for the kill, trying to seize control of everything before I could become a problem. I looked at the brochure, at the smiling, silver-haired models playing shuffleboard. I looked at the legal documents designed to strip me of my autonomy. I felt the ice in my veins solidify. I pushed the papers back across the table. "That won't be necessary," I said, my voice calm but firm. "I am perfectly capable of managing my own affairs, and I have no intention of selling this house or leaving." Martin's face tightened with frustration. "Dad, be reasonable. This is for your own good." "My good?" I asked, letting a hint of steel enter my tone. "Or yours, Martin? Is your lifestyle becoming a bit too expensive to maintain?" The barb hit its mark. His face flushed with anger. Eleanor shot me a look of pure venom. The meeting ended badly, just as I knew it would. They left in a cloud of righteous indignation, muttering about how ungrateful I was, how I was being difficult. They didn't understand. I wasn't being difficult. I was being strategic. Every move they made, every grab for control, was another piece of evidence for the story I was constructing. They were writing their own villain's narrative, and they were far too arrogant to see it. The stage was being set. The actors were all in place. The following Saturday, a discreet car pulled into my driveway. Dr. Eris Thorne stepped out. He was a tall, distinguished man in his late 60s, with a sharp, intelligent face and eyes that missed nothing. He carried a leather briefcase and wore an expression of grim purpose. She shook my hand firmly. "Mr. Hale," he said, "it is an honor to meet you, though I wish it were under better circumstances. May I see it?" I nodded and led him around to the back of a house. He stood on the edge of the concrete slab, his hands clasped behind his back. He was silent for a full minute, his professional gaze scanning the scene of the crime. A deep, mournful sigh escaped him, a botanist's version of a wail. To think what lay beneath this, it's sacrilege. It's like paving over the Sistine Chapel to make a parking lot. He turned to me, his eyes filled with a shared grief and a newfound resolve. "We have to do something, Charles. Rose's legacy cannot end like this." Inside, over coffee, we solidified the plan. I gave him photocopies of Rose's key journal entries, the ones detailing her entire process for creating the Midnight Blue. He studied them with the reverence of a scholar examining a sacred text. "Her genius is on every page," he murmured. "The patent for this process alone, Charles, it's worth a fortune. The naming rights, the propagation licenses. We're talking about a horticultural event that happens once in a century." He looked at me, a shrewd glint in his eye. "The National Botanical Gardens annual gala and press conference is in 3 weeks," he said. "It is the single most important event on the horticultural calendar. The world's media will be there. The biggest names in botany and commercial horticulture. It's the perfect venue. We will announce a new wing, the Rose Hale Memorial Wing, dedicated to botanical sciences. And as part of that dedication, we will posthumously award her the Grand Medallion for her life's work, culminating in her final, breathtaking discovery." My role was simple. I was to do nothing. I was to let Martin and Eleanor continue their campaign. Let them make calls to lawyers. Let them tell their friends about their stubborn, difficult old father. The more they pushed, the more they isolated themselves, the more dramatic their fall would be. My silence would be their undoing. They would mistake my patience for weakness, my strategy for surrender. They were so busy planning the sale of my house, they wouldn't even think to ask what I was planning. Before he left, Dr. Thorne asked one more question. Did Rose ever preserve any specimens? Pressed flowers, perhaps? Or seed samples? My heart sank for a moment. We had searched her study and found nothing. But then a memory sparked. Rose had a private safe deposit box at the downtown bank. She called it her seed vault. She kept her prize-winning seeds there, safe from fire or flood. I had forgotten all about it in the haze of grief after her passing. There was a chance, a small but very real chance. The next day, with the key from her desk, I went to the bank. The metal box was cool to the touch. I opened it, my hands trembling. Inside, nestled among carefully labeled packets of seeds from her other prize winners, was a small, velvet-lined box. I lifted the lid. There, perfectly preserved and labeled under glass, were two things: a single, pressed flower of the most impossible, beautiful, midnight blue, and a small vial containing a few dozen tiny, precious seeds. The legacy wasn't entirely gone. It was just dormant. The invitation arrived at my house 2 weeks later, a thick, cream-colored card with the embossed seal of the National Botanical Garden. It was addressed to me, but I knew 2 identical ones had been sent to Martin and Eleanor. Dr. Thorne had called it baiting the trap. The invitation was to the annual gala, announcing the dedication of a new wing. It hinted that a local family's philanthropic legacy would be the centerpiece of the evening. They would be unable to resist. Their vanity was as predictable as photosynthesis. On the night of the gala, they arrived at my door to give me a ride. They were preening, dressed in absurdly expensive clothes. Eleanor wore a glittering silver dress, Martin a tuxedo that looked uncomfortably tight. They assumed a philanthropic legacy was theirs, a testament to their imagined social standing. They believed I had finally come to my senses and was going to announce the sale of the house and a large donation in their name. Their condescension was a thick, cloying perfume in the car. "Dad, just let us do the talking tonight," Martin said, adjusting his bow tie in the rearview mirror. "We know how to handle these events. It's important to make the right impression." I just nodded, a humble old man in his best, slightly dated suit, playing my part to perfection. I was an object to them, a prop to be managed for their own aggrandizement. They had no idea they were the ones being managed, led gently to the precipice of their own ruin. The ride was silent, filled with their smug anticipation. The botanical garden was breathtaking at night. The grand conservatory glowed, a jewel box of light and life. The air was filled with the scent of night-blooming jasmine and the polite murmur of the city's elite. Martin and Eleanor worked the room, shaking hands, laughing too loudly, soaking in the reflected glory they believed was about to be theirs. I found a quiet corner, accepted a glass of water, and watched. I was the calm eye of a hurricane I had created, and the storm was about to break. Dr. Thorne found me by the orchid display. "Are you ready, Charles?" he asked, his expression one of sober support. I nodded, as ready as I'll ever be. He squeezed my shoulder. "Rose would be so proud, not just of the flower, but of you." His words were a balm to my soul, a final fortification before the battle. He gestured towards the stage at the front of the grand hall. "It's time," he said. He guided me to a seat in the front row, directly in front of the podium. Martin and Eleanor soon joined me, beaming. Dr. Thorne took the stage to a round of applause. He spoke eloquently about the garden's mission, about conservation, and about the importance of legacy. Then he began to speak of Rose. He spoke of her passion, her artistry, and her unheralded genius as a genetic botanist. I saw Martin and Eleanor exchange a confused look. This was not the script they had imagined. They thought this was about their money, not my dead wife's hobby. Their smiles began to look a little strained at the edges. "And so," Dr. Thorne continued, his voice ringing with passion, "it is the garden's profound honor to announce the creation of the Rose Hale Memorial Wing for Botanical Sciences." He paused as polite applause rippled through the room. "But that is not all. We are also here tonight to reveal the project that she completed just before her passing. A discovery that will change the world of horticulture forever." A large screen behind him flickered to life. The room fell silent. An image of the pressed blue flower appeared. A collective gasp went through the audience. Botanists and horticulturalists in the crowd were on their feet, their faces a mask of disbelief and awe. Dr. Thorne let the image sink in. "Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you the world's first genetically stable cyanic rose, the culmination of a lifetime of work by the brilliant Rose Hale. She called it the Midnight Blue." He then went on to explain in clear, simple terms the monetary value, the patent, the global licensing. The figures he mentioned started in the tens of millions. I could feel the shift beside me. Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. Martin was pale, his jaw slack. He was doing frantic calculations in his head, the numbers spinning behind his eyes like a slot machine. They weren't seeing a flower. They were seeing cars, houses, yachts, a life of effortless luxury. all materializing on the screen in front of them. Their greed was so palpable, it was practically vibrating in the air between us. And now Dr. Thorne said, his voice dropping to a somber tone, "I want to invite Rose's husband, Charles Hale, to the stage to say a few words about his wife's incredible legacy and the tragic fate of the only living specimens of this priceless botanical treasure." All eyes turned to me. I stood up slowly, my old bones protesting, and walked to the podium. I looked out at the sea of faces, and then I looked directly at my son and his wife. Their faces were a mixture of confusion, dawning horror, and avarice. "Thank you, Dr. Thorne," I began, my voice steady and clear, amplified by the microphone. "My wife, Rose, loved three things above all else. She loved me, she loved her family, and she loved her garden. That garden was her laboratory and her sanctuary. It was where she performed miracles. It was where, in a small, sheltered patch by an old stone wall, she cultivated the world's only living midnight blue roses." I let that hang in the air for a moment. Then I turned my gaze fully on Martin. My son, Martin, and his wife, Eleanor, also love things. They love property values. They love practicality. They love what they call functional outdoor living spaces. They love these things so much that 3 weeks ago, while I was away, they hired a crew to destroy my wife's garden, to dig up every last one of her priceless, irreplaceable plants and bury them under a slab of concrete, to build a patio. The silence in the room was absolute. You could have heard a pedal drop. The color drained from Martin's face. Eleanor looked like she was going to be sick. The cameras in the back of the room, which had been focused on me, now swiveled towards them. The red recording lights like malevolent eyes. I saw a flash of a photographer's bulb. Their private act of disrespect was now a very public spectacle. Martin started to stand up, to protest, but he seemed to have forgotten how to speak. He just opened and closed his mouth like a fish. They thought they were burying a few messy bushes to increase the value of a house they were eager to sell, I continued, my voice cold as winter stone. What they actually did was bulldoze a multi-million-dollar legacy. They paved over a fortune that would have secured their family for generations. Not out of malice, I don't think, but out of a profound and staggering ignorance. An inability to see value in anything that can't be immediately bought or sold. This was their meltdown. It was not loud, but a quiet, complete implosion. Eleanor let out a small, strangled cry and fainted dead away in her chair, a cascade of silver sequins. Martin, finally finding his voice, croaked, No, that's not true. He's an old man, he's confused. The flowers, they can't be, they were just roses." His denial was weak, pathetic. The entire room, filled with the world's foremost botanical experts, knew exactly what they were. They were not just roses. They were a miracle. And he had destroyed them for a place to put a barbecue grill. I ignored his outburst, but, I said, raising my hand for silence, my wife was meticulous. She was a scientist, and she was wise. She knew the value of what she had, and she always kept the backup. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small vial of seeds. I held it up for the cameras. Rose's legacy is not extinct. It is merely dormant. And with the help of the National Botanical Garden and the initial funding from the sale at my house and my house alone, the midnight blue will bloom again. That was the final blow. The confirmation that the money, all of it, was mine. That they had not only destroyed their own inheritance, but had also been publicly cut out from any future gain. Martin sank back into his chair as if his bones had dissolved. He stared at the vial in my hand, the tiny seeds that represented everything he had just lost. The story was on every news channel the next morning. Air destroys $1 million flower for Patio. They were ruined, not just financially, but socially, publicly, completely. In the weeks that followed, I moved with quiet efficiency. I put the house on the market. It sold quickly, though for significantly less than Martin had hoped. The story of the concrete garden of greed had become a piece of local folklore, and nobody wanted the bad karma associated with the property. The new owners, a young couple with children, promised me they would break up the patio and plant a new garden. That was enough for me. I used the proceeds as the first donation to the memorial wing. I bought a small, elegant condominium on the top floor of a building that overlooked the botanical garden. From my balcony, I could see the conservatory, where I had vindicated my wife's memory. I could watch the seasons change, not in my own small patch of earth, but across acres of beautifully tended life. Dr. Thorne and his team were already working with Rose's seeds, the meticulous process of germination underway. Her legacy was in the best possible hands. I had done my duty. My lawyer drew up a new will. It was simple and direct. My entire estate, including all future royalties from the patent of the Midnight Blue Rose, was to be placed in a trust. That trust would forever fund the Rose Hale Memorial Wing and provide scholarships for promising young botany students. Martin and Eleanor were mentioned by name, but only once. They were to receive the sum of $1 each, so that they may not claim to have been forgotten. ... Forwards, but to have been judged. They tried to contact me, of course. First came the furious, incoherent voicemails from Martin. Then came the wheedling, tearful messages from Eleanor. They were followed by letters from a series of increasingly desperate lawyers, threatening to contest the new will, claiming I had been manipulated. But they had no case. I was of sound mind and body, and their own public actions had provided all the proof anyone needed of their character. I never responded. Their words were just noise now. One afternoon, I received a different kind of call. It was from my sister Helen's youngest daughter, Sarah. She was a quiet, thoughtful young woman who had always sent me handwritten letters. She had seen the story on the news. I just wanted to call and say, "I'm proud of you, Uncle Charles," she said, her voice soft. "And I miss Aunt Rose's garden. She taught me how to prune the climbers when I was 10. I never forgot." Her simple, genuine words were worth more to me than all the millions the Rose patent would generate. We started talking regularly after that. She would visit me at the condo, and we would have tea on the balcony. She never asked for a thing. She just wanted to hear stories about Rose, about their life together, about the garden. She had her grandmother's gentle hymns and her mother's kind heart. In her, I saw a flicker of hope. That family was not just about blood, but about shared respect, about tending to memories with the same care you would give a fragile seedling. Our relationship began to tentatively mend, on my terms. Martin and Eleanor had to sell their ostentatious house. Their credit, built on the expectation of a huge inheritance, collapsed. They moved into a small, rented townhouse in a less fashionable part of the city. I heard from Helen that Martin was forced to take a humiliating sales job, and Eleanor's society friends no longer returned her calls. They had wanted to rise in the world, but their greed had become an anchor, dragging them down into obscurity and shame, a fitting consequence. Sometimes I would see them in the news, small articles about their financial troubles or legal disputes. They were a cautionary tale, a local punchline about greed and stupidity. They had traded a living, breathing miracle for a pile of concrete and a lifetime of regret. They inherited a house with a worthless backyard, a public reputation for avarice, and a profound, unfillable hole where their future was supposed to be. Justice, I learned, is a perennial. It can lie dormant, but it always blooms eventually. A year after the gala, Dr. Thorne invited me to a private viewing in a special, climate-controlled section of the conservatory. Under soft lights was a single, perfect flower. It was the first of Rose's seeds to reach maturity. Its petals were the color of a twilight sky, a deep, impossible blue that seemed to drink the light. It was breathtaking. Her legacy was alive. I reached out and gently touched a velvety petal. For the first time in a long time, the ache in my chest was not grief, but peace. The Rose Hale Memorial Wing opened to the public the following spring. It was a beautiful glass and steel structure filled with light and cutting-edge equipment for a new generation of botanists. At the entrance, there was a simple bronze plaque with Rose's picture and a quote from one of her journals. "The world is full of miracles. You just have to be patient enough to grow them." I became a permanent volunteer there, a quiet old man in a fun sweater, showing children the magic of how a tiny seed can change the world. I never saw Martin or Eleanor again. Their absence was a kind of silence that was more comforting than any apology would have been. They had made their choices. They had valued the vessel over what it contained, the land over the life it nurtured. They had looked at a garden and seen only real estate, a transactional view of a world that is anything but. Their punishment was not my revenge, but the simple, inevitable outcome of their own shallow values. They were left with exactly what they deserved, a barren, empty space. My life became simple, but full. It was filled with the laughter of my grandniece Sarah, the quiet companionship of books, and the ever-present beauty of the gardens below my window. I found a quiet joy in my new purpose, in helping to cultivate my wife's legacy, ensuring her gift to the world would continue to grow long after I was gone. I was no longer just the keeper of her memory, but an active participant in its future. I was a gardener once more, tending to the most important roots of all. One evening, as I sat on my balcony watching the sunset, Sarah brought me a small, potted rose bush. It was a midnight blue, one of the first to be made available from the garden's propagation program. "For you, Uncle Charles," she said, "so you can have a piece of her garden with you again." I looked at the small, perfect plant, its single, deep, blue bud tightly closed, waiting for the right moment to bloom. It was a symbol of everything that had been lost and everything that had been found. In the end, it was never about the money. Not really. The millions were just a language my son could understand, the only tool sharp enough to make him feel the true weight of his actions. It was about respect. It was about the casual cruelty of people who believe the elderly are relics of the past, to be managed and disposed of, rather than living libraries of experience and wisdom. They thought my love for my wife's garden was a weakness, a sentimental folly. I never understood that it was my greatest strength. They had tried to erase Rose, to pave over her memory for profit, but her roots ran too deep. They ran through me, through her journals, through the tiny, resilient seeds she had the foresight to save. You cannot destroy a legacy like that with concrete and greed. It will always find a way to the light. It was a lesson in botany and a lesson in life. The most valuable things are not those with a price tag, but those that are nurtured with love, patience, and dedication over time. My son and his wife are a footnote in my wife's story now, a cautionary tale attached to the legend of the midnight blue rose. They are remembered not for what they built, but for what they, in their ignorance, destroyed. A truly fitting legacy for people who only ever understood the cost of things and never the value. Their story will be told by tour guides in the Rose Hail Wing for years to come, a permanent testament to their folly, etched into the history of the very institution they sought to impress. I often think about that brutal gray slab they built. In its own way, it was a monument to their character, cold, hard, and utterly devoid of life. They replaced a living, breathing tapestry of love and science with a tombstone, and in doing so, they wrote their own epitaph. My garden, the one I now tend in my heart and on my balcony, is small, but it is filled with color, with fragrance, with memory. And that is a kind of wealth they will never comprehend. As the evening sky deepens to the exact shade of my wife's perfect rose, I feel a sense of profound contentment. Justice isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about restoration. It's about taking a broken thing and making it whole again. It's about ensuring that what is truly beautiful and valuable in the world is preserved. Rose is gone, but she is not absent. She is in every new leaf, every scholarship student, every visitor who marvels at her creation. I did right by her, and my heart is finally at peace.